would say.
Hmm.
Wasn't very good at it, and it is a limiting factor, right? Because you can have all the talent in the world, but if you can't kind of get over the mental hurdles and the obstacles that inevitably come with sport and with the challenges that it throws at you, then it becomes really difficult to succeed.
It really truly does. I see it all the time. Even with the professional athletes, they're there. They're obviously very skilled, else they wouldn't be a professional athlete. But they know there's this gap between where they're capable of performing and what they're really doing under pressure in competition. And generally, you see that because they're able to do it in practices, right? They might be able to keep up with the best in the world, and then something falters when they go into the high pressure moments. And the only thing that really has changed is what's going on between your two ears in that type of context or situation. So understanding what exactly that is for each person and helping them, build a framework so they can then do what they're capable of doing.
Yeah, it's a big piece of the puzzle, and I think a lot of probably in the last kind of 10 years, I'd say 10, 15 years, there's been a lot more interest in the sports psychology side of things, and a lot of people paying more attention to that part of professional sport, especially where they've really been kind of honing that and working with sports psychologists and kind of working on their mindset as well as the physical skills and the physical abilities to perform whatever that sport may be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's even when I started, which was 15 years ago, and it was like you could tell it was kind of there, but just the evolution and the growth and the spotlight on it over the last 15 years is huge. So I even looking at just for myself from when I started to where it is now, and the volume of practitioners that are getting into the field wanting to work with athletes, the amount of resources that athletes now have in professional teams at universities is absolutely massive. It's seen a massive shift over the last 15 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm gonna take it all the way back now. What made you kind of fall in love with sport in the first place? What brought you to sport, and especially ice hockey? Because that's a tough sport, right?
I guess it is, but if you're from Canada, like I started skating when I was 2 years old, so I started skating before I could talk. So skating was very second nature to me. What drew me to sports, I think it's an interesting thing because I was drawn to sports at 2 years old, 3 years old. Like I had a little Fisher Price basketball net when I was 3 years old, and skating when I was two, and out on the backyard rink doing things. So I think for me, maybe one, I was a little bit slower. I didn't speak till I was three, which is, obviously on the slower end. Usually kids are starting to speak, I think, a little bit earlier than that, but I came out with full sentences. So I think for me, I was always observing. And I think just the idea of being able to really focus in on something and perfect it, not even obviously perfecting it, you never do, but that kind of journey to trying to get really good at something obviously had a very instinctual draw for me. And I've always loved it. I've always loved kind of being in movement and being able to really just focus in on something, have that deep focus, and really try and hone something. And school was very difficult for me. I had a learning disability, so that was a little bit harder for me. And sports, you could see the hard work turn into something, into success, and I was able to do that very very well. And so I think I was able to pick up sports a little bit easier than other things in life early on.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of sport, and I've always played sport as well in some form since I was kind of. I think I started a little bit later than you. I was four, I think, when I started going and doing. I started with karate, but um, yeah, something about it, right, that kind of hooks you once you get into sport, into the competition, into the challenges and stuff. And but not only that, especially with team sports, is that kind of camaraderie that you get. You're meeting people. As a kid, you're building up social skills. You're learning how to deal with loss, how to, you know, not be an obnoxious winner, and all these kind of different things as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, yeah, it was an environment and a place that I felt I belonged. I think that's always a big thing for athletes, right? That often draws them in is a feeling of they belong and being a part of something, being a part of something bigger than themselves. And I definitely, I think, was always more drawn to team sports. I actually really love tennis, which is an individual sport, but didn't really play too much competitively, just more of something to do. I think kind of what helped train me and for hockey, but also just to do for fun. I think you always have to have that sport that's just there for fun and you're enjoying it without it being super competitive or trying to accomplish something really big. And yeah, having the teammates, the people support you, And as you said, just learning some of those skills that maybe you wouldn't learn otherwise. The, as you said, the failing, falling down. Like I got cut from my first team, I think when I was 7. So you learn right away how do you respond, and what does that look like, and to learn how to respond in a way that's going to help you just grow and develop, and not get too down on yourself, and just move forward. And that's just kind of normalized that you don't always get everything. You do have to sometimes reshift and reframe, and work a little bit harder to then maybe get the goal that you're looking for. And definitely sports taught me that very young.
Yeah, it's an important thing. I think a lot of people who don't play sport miss out on a lot of learning, and I'd say resilience building really builds a lot of resilience in your sport, dealing with defeat, dealing with being cut from teams, and that feeling that you're not performing, or you're not doing as well as you'd like to do, and that there's so many different factors in sport that translate to life in general. That I think it's really really good for kids to get into that kind of,
Absolutely.
find a sport, not necessarily have to do this a particular sport, but find a sport that they can explore and do this learning in.
Yeah, and when we look back, like why young, sports, I guess, existed, and why people did sports at a young age before it became a multi-million-dollar business and you can make lots and lots of money, doing it. It was for that purpose, right? It was to develop certain characteristics that were going to help you as you moved into a career and into family life, and all of that. That was the whole purpose, as you said, learning teamwork, learning resilience, learning, how to build maybe confidence, all those various factors. And I think that gets lost sometimes, where that is a primary benefit and importance for playing sports. And you said there's so many sports out there that generally any person can find something that kind of matches them. And I've seen that through my career, all these different personalities and different people, and they all seem to find something, whether it's fencing or Irish dancing, or if it's the traditional sports, lacrosse, football, baseball, right? Everyone kind of, there is a sport out there generally for someone based off of what's going to really work for them.
Yeah, absolutely. There is something for everybody, and there's so many out there that I can't even name them all. There'll be so many sports, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But um, ice hockey. I want to talk about ice hockey, especially in Canada. That must have been really competitive because obviously, is it the national sport in Canada?
Technically, no. Lacrosse is the national
Oh,
sport, but
okay.
I would consider, yeah. I guess most people would think hockey is because it's so big. It's the same as football in Europe, right? It's just
Yeah,
massive. It's everything to be a Canadian hockey player. It is exceptionally competitive, and I'm from Toronto, so Toronto was a hub of obviously exceptionally good players and good teams. Everyone generally traveled to us. Like I didn't have to travel very often when I was playing as a kid, because a lot of the big tournaments were held in the Toronto area, and so people would be coming in. So we get to see teams from the states and other places, and so it was fantastic, and I love it. And I tell a lot of my clients who are in kind of a sport where they're in the hotbed of that sport, where that's going to be great. You're going to become better for that, because I was around people who were good, which forces you to be better. Versus obviously if you're in a place where maybe that sport isn't as big, and you're kind of like the big fish in the small pond, it's better to be a little fish in a big pond, and especially if you're wanting to become as good as you possibly can be. And so I was very, very fortunate where, yeah, greatly, competitive, great coaches, great support systems in terms of learning how to skate better, shoot better, right? All of those, other skill sets that you go and find specific coaches for, all of it was there. So it was pretty easy to develop. And then obviously the weather in the winter, you can build a rink and go out there and just play and have fun and try and develop skills on your own, which I think is really, really important.
yeah, absolutely. That's the danger sometimes with sport, is that if you get, especially if you're doing well at it, that you take the fun out of it. That's the danger, right? And you need to try and keep that element of fun, especially at a younger age. I suppose it's different when you get to adult kind of professional level, where it's essentially a job and you're expected to do a job. It might be slightly different, but as a child, I think it's important to keep that element of fun and enjoyment in it, because it keeps your eye on why you're doing it in the first place.
Exactly. And it's so easy to get lost. And even as you've mentioned, as an adult, if you're a professional and this is how you're making money, it still should be fun, because that actually makes you a better player. If you're having fun, it allows you to be more creative, be more loose, be more relaxed. and that makes you ultimately, be able to perform at a higher level. And it very much does easily get lost, and it usually gets lost at a certain point. If it does get lost for somebody, when it does start to turn into something, I guess, quote unquote, more serious, maybe they're going to get a scholarship offer, they're aiming for a scholarship offer, or they're wanting to go pro, and it now becomes this thing you have to do, or the outcome becomes has such weight to it. And so I think that's an important thing, and something I work on is how to help people have more fun and to enjoy it and to be more loose and to keep that top of mind, because I experienced that myself, where I lost the fun, and when I got it back, I could see the difference, and appreciate what I was doing and appreciate just getting to play the game. And it didn't matter so much about those external things that we do often sometimes start to look at, like how nice is the dressing room? Do I get free stuff? Like all these variable things that, obviously can get added if you're playing at a university level or a professional level. And it ultimately it's just about being on that ice and being the kid. And you still have to work hard, but you have to have fun. And when you look at the best athletes, they think they keep that fun. You can see it. They're really truly enjoying it, and that's what allows them to be good and to be good consistently and to probably have longer careers. So, being an ice hockey player, and the Four Nations Cup is going on right now, or Four Nations Face Off. You look at, like I said, Sidney Crosby, and he's in his late 30s, and you can tell he loves the game, and he's still going strong, and still having an impact, even though he's the oldest guy in the entire tournament. So that, I think, is a huge part.
Yes, it is important to keep the fun, I suppose, and ultimately as well, you can kind of tell when people are not enjoying it. And that's not just sport. That's kind of generally in life as well. Like any job and stuff. If you're really not enjoying it, people can tell. It's if you're enjoying something and you're really into it, you feel a part of it, and you'll go above and beyond. You'll do a bit more. You'll maybe experiment a little bit, try new things, especially with sport stuff. So it is important to keep that kind of, I won't say smile on your face, but you know what I mean. That kind of joy for what you're doing. So I think when that goes, it can become a bit soulless then potentially.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you said, anything. I think if you're truly enjoying what you're doing, as I say, you never work a day in your life, right? You're enjoying it, and you have a greater impact. You have a greater ability to help people, or do whatever it is that you're needing to do. So yeah, it doesn't just mean sports. It means anything. You really do truly have to enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, and as an athlete, generally, speaking, you have a short career, right? So you need to kind of make the most of it as well. So enjoy it while you've got it, because it goes away eventually.
Exactly. It goes away very fast. And I think you need to, you said, appreciate the moments. And because, yeah, you could have a 2-year career, or you could have a 20-year career as a professional. You don't always know. But I think when you do appreciate it, you're more likely to have the 20-year career, because you're enjoying it. It doesn't feel like a job. Um, and if it does go away, then you've really made the most out of it. And, that's also a part of it, is one is you have to have the fun, but you also have to understand it's something you're doing, but not who you are. And that obviously helps also with the fun, to know that this is just something you're stepping into. And whether it's 2 years or 20 years, at some point it will come to an end from a competitive standpoint. And you kind of have to know who you are, and that you are, your self-worth and your value is not tied to this very singular thing that you're doing.
Yeah, that's an important point, to be honest, because that transition from being an athlete into, I want to say, the real world, and that sounds a bit wrong, but you know what I mean. But out of that kind of athlete world, where you've been an athlete, you've been doing hopefully a sport that you love for a period of time, and that's been your job and your sole purpose, and all your focus has been towards that for probably the majority of your life at least. Then where do you go from there? That's a difficult breakup to take, right?
It is, and to have been so good at something so young, and to then walk away and retire, even if you have a long career at a fairly young age, long before most people are thinking about the next step of life, to figure out what that looks like for you, and to have that transition. And that's, also a part of what I do, is help people set themselves up for making that transition easier. It's going to be hard, right? You've put so much time, energy, and effort into something, as you said, not even the sport and being on the ice. You look at any, or talk to any ex-athlete, they always talk about, especially in a team sport, it's more about, being in the locker room, being around the people, your teammates, and that obviously then is a huge transition. Or being in a schedule that's so routine based, so regimented, and some people obviously that really is comforting, and then all of a sudden you're kind of thrown out into the world where you have to create that for yourself. And so how do you set that up? How do you start to think about, what you may want to do after sports? And obviously you see that a lot now with athletes who are a little bit older. They're starting to set up some of those things for post their athletic career, to help them with that transition. But then also a big part of it is still understanding who are you if you're not that athlete, and to make sure that you kind of detach yourself and your identity from being the athlete. And that then helps it to know that yes, you're putting a ton of time, energy, effort into this. It takes up most of your time, so even if you don't have a lot of time to explore other parts of what you'd like to do post career, to just know that this is a role you're stepping into, and to have a little bit of a detachment from that how much that is you. And then that helps you to kind of obviously be able to step out of it and step into a new role at some point.
Yeah, I think is that's something people are more conscious of these days, I think, than they used to be. But I think it's something you need to work on throughout your career potentially, because, like you say, there's a danger that you become institutionalized almost to the sport, and that you tie the sport. It is a big part of who you are and what you do. So it's hard because they kind of intertwine a bit, don't they? So you got to kind of have a reasonable distance from it to say no, that's what I do and I've enjoyed it, have a great time, but it doesn't define me. I can still go on, I can still do this, I can still do that, I can still have a completely different life.
No, exactly. And there's different ways to do it. Kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, right? What's the point of sports? One of them is to, develop yourself and to know what you are growing within yourself that will be carried with you into the next thing. Because I think a lot of people just don't know if they'll be good at something else or how to do something else, and to understand that, as we mentioned already, that sports is a great place to facilitate a lot of things that are going to really truly help you, down the road in other aspects of life. And yeah, as you said, from the beginning of your career, if you can just keep that in mind, and there's various ways that to do it, to make sure that when you come out of it, it is a little bit of an easier transition.
Yeah. What do you make of especially kind of combat sports like boxers and stuff that keep coming back at, older ages, and kind of so some of it has got to be financial motivation, but I bet some of it is because they haven't quite let go as well.
There's always that possibility. I mean, you never know until are obviously in somebody's head, or talk to them. And so obviously looking from the outside in, it's hard to know exactly whether it maybe is a financial motivation. If they need the money, maybe it is hard for them to let it go. And I think for some, maybe they truly do love it, and they want to keep going, and they're able to do that. Obviously, it just probably really depends on the person. So yeah, that's a hard thing to maybe fully understand if you're outside looking in.
Yeah, it worries me with kind of combat sports, because obviously as you're aging as well, there's more risk, I suppose, from a combat sport. To be honest, there's more risk with any sport, I suppose, as you age, because your body's not as able to recover. I think it's the recovery that's the biggest one. That's what goes first, right? The ability to recover as quickly.
Yeah, recovery is a big thing, but as you said, times have changed, and athletes have such, I guess, respect now for the recovery process. Most of them, not all of them. Sometimes it does take till you're getting older and you realize you got to recover a little bit differently. But the volume of tools and the resources teams now provide, when you do look at the ones that can have a really long career, they really do understand the recovery part, and make it almost, again, just as equally as important as what they do within their practices or skill time, right? They're making sure that they are recovering as best as they possibly can be. And then maybe changing how they are approaching even their training. And I think that's what you see also with, the smart older athletes, is they understand that they can't maybe train the way they did when they were 20. When they're 35, you have to change that. It doesn't mean you can't still be impactful with what you're doing, but you need to change it to make sure you are taking care of your body, still making it get to the point where it needs to from a conditioning and strength point of view, but understanding you have to change and be flexible and adapt to, where your body actually is. And, even changing maybe how you approach the game itself. Like, are there ways you have to maybe just slightly adapt to the things that maybe you used to be able to do, but now, other people, or whether faster or whatever it might be, and still be effective. I think that's where you see some of those really great, older athletes are able to really adapt Obviously, over here, like you look at someone like Tom Brady, right? His ability to go so long. You look at how much time he spent on his physical body and recovery and making sure it was as healthy and as good as it could be, and made that its own job almost, which is one of the reasons he was able to go as long as he could.
Yeah, definitely, and you see it in football in Europe, in soccer, where really intelligent players, they will just change the way they play as they age because they're not physically able to, run as fast, cover the same ground, and do everything else. So they adjust their position and their style of play, and they're still really, really effective. But they've been really intelligent about it and used, all the experience that they've gained, all the wisdom and the ability that they have to kind of just change things up.
No, exactly. That's a huge part, and that's also kind of a mental part as well, because some athletes just can't actually do that. They get so stuck with the role that they play and needing to, like, whether the role that they had when they were 20, 21, if they were obviously super fast or whatever it is that their kind of role was or style of play was, and they really have a hard time letting that go and making that transition and adapting to, okay, where am I now and how do I need to adapt my style of play so I can still be effective at this time. And so that's where you see, you said, those intelligent athletes, they're able to let go of the role that they had and not get too identified with it and be able to adapt with time. And I think that's also very, very important.
Absolutely, and I think that the mental game becomes more and more important as you age. I think that kind of experience of being in difficult situations in teams or being in certain situations that you can kind of use that to your advantage, really.
No, exactly. Yeah.
So how did you cope, Kate, with kind of your transition through your career? Because it kind of works differently as well in kind of Canada and the States than it does in Europe and the UK, especially. Because we don't really do kind of university scholarships and stuff like that generally. We tend to kind of recruit kids from local teams and stuff like that, and they get recruited into the big professional teams, and then they kind of develop them through an academy and stuff like that.
Yeah, so yeah, and it's definitely very different, right? So for me, it was, you play in high school, and usually you're playing high school, for me, hockey, which was more of just the fun thing. It wasn't really competitive. And then you have a club team. And so mine was equivalent to what we call like a junior hockey club team over here, where you had, all the, top players for that age group, and you played each other. And, majority of us were going to go off, and I think all of us, I shouldn't say majority, all of us would go off and play, whether in the States or in Canada at the university level. And that would be where the coaches from the university level would be recruiting us. And then you get recruited and go into, university in Canada or a scholarship at the States. And then when I was going through it, there were some professional teams in a professional league, but it was, you're not getting paid. So if you're coming out of university, you can go and, maybe get placed on a team, but there was no drafting. There was none of that. They would just kind of, come up to you and say, hey, we want you on the team, but you're going to have to still have a job and everything. Like, you maybe get one practice a week. You don't get a lot of ice time. And you play on the weekends. It would be the level where all the Olympic players would play, but that was a big issue, back in the day, where the best players, you would get the best hockey at the university level. So a lot of the Olympic players or national team players were at the university level because they're getting to practice and play consistently. Because once you graduate, you're not really getting much ice time and ability to really continue to practice and compete at a high level. But that has now changed. Now there is, from a women's standpoint, obviously the males always had the professional league as an option. They had different routes they could take. You could go university, you could go junior route, and then go off to the pros or and be in a minor league for the pros. But for women now there is a professional league, so now it's different. You can come out of university, be drafted, and then go off. But yeah, like over here, all the sports, I think except for basketball, I think basketball you can get drafted right out of high school. You're generally going to be going through university before you head off to that next level. Um, and then when you're done, you're kind of transitioning and moving on with the next chapter of your life.
Yeah, to be honest, I think arguably the way that you guys do it out there is better with the high school, doing it through school and university and stuff like that. Because I think in the UK, so I talk about football especially because that's the biggest sport in the UK. Generally, they'll recruit children really young from clubs, and they'll have little like trials and whatever, and they'll have clubs and they'll recruit kids from clubs. and then they'll go into like an academy where they may, depending on the level of the club, they may be there kind of full time, they may be there part time, whatever. But they'll sign them up really young, and then a lot of them don't make it, and a lot of them will get cut by about 16, and then even a lot of them will that make it into the kind of 16 to 18-year-old bracket will get cut because it's difficult to be a professional athlete, as we know, especially in a competitive sport. And I think that's really difficult because then you're bringing kids in at the age of 11 to kind of 16. They're thinking that they might do something with their life. They kind of put school on the back burner and all their education and all their other future plans, and then they get cut and they're left with nothing. And it's not great.
Yeah, it definitely makes it harder if you do get cut and you've kind of put those things on the back burner. And I think even if you do make it, you put those things on the back burner, so you didn't really get to develop other parts of yourself while you were, obviously pursuing this sport. So again, like when you retire, like what's there besides the sport? So I think there's a number of things that impact. So yeah, in one sense, it is a little bit better over here, and it'll be interesting because now in the NCAA in the States specifically, because they're able to pay players, and that's completely shifted over the last few years. More kids are probably going to want to go through school because they can make a good amount of money. There are kids, I mean, again, it's top 1%, but there are people making millions of dollars at the university level in the state. So it makes it so that's a little bit more desirable to stay in school, because for some of the sports you can go for a year or two and then get drafted. So you don't necessarily finish your degree and anything like that. But now with that, I guess, money there, it will help people to maybe hopefully stay in school. I definitely think the female side has a little bit more of an advantage because generally, I mean, again, it's changed now, um, but for a long time you couldn't really make a lot of money playing your sport, so you're kind of always needing to figure out how would you either make money or making sure that you do have that education. And I think that obviously is a benefit to the females to be able to then, when the time comes, transition or just have some different skill sets and a different ability than if you just are 100% focused on sports all the time.
Yeah, and again, if you do that and you do it the right way, I suppose it helps the transition after sport. Even if you do end up making a lot of money and having a good career, then after sport it helps you kind of with the transition away from it as well, because you've already learned these other things. You've already planned for other stuff that you could potentially do. So you can still have a purpose when you leave, and you can still look at other options.
No, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that made it easier for myself. It was still hard. It's still a hard transition because a lot of my identity was still wrapped up, or my value was wrapped up in the sport. But I knew I was always having to think about what was next, or what would I do for a career. Even if I was still playing hockey professionally, going after the Olympics, I'd still be having to figure out a way to make money and do those things. And so at that time, even in high school before I went to university, I started to think about, like, okay, what do I want to do? And it made me probably a little bit more focused in my undergrad as well about what to study, because sometimes I think for some of the athletes in certain sports, they don't care so much about what they study in undergrad because it's just kind of like it's there, but I'm really focused on sports. Where for me, I really had to think about what do I want, because this is going to tie into what I'm going to do when I graduate here. And so let's really focus in on that. And I think that it was helpful to make sure that a good chunk of my time was still spent on something that was not just sports.
Yeah, yeah, I do think it's important that. Um, you mentioned the Olympics, Kate. What kind of lead up to that? What was the kind of process in that kind of selection for the Olympics that you went through? Did you go through like a process, or was it just?
I didn't go through a major process because I did retire before I might have gotten into some of the deeper aspects of that process. It really was first and foremost because it was the 2010 Olympics, which was hosted in Vancouver, so on Canadian soil, which any host country usually puts more resources and more money when they're going to host it, just to make sure they do very well on the podium. And so, not a lot of us, but some of us obviously were starting to be pegged as potential candidates. So the government was starting to help us financially. They would give us some money to help with training or whatever it might have been to help us obviously become a little bit better. So that would be really the first indication if you were pegged as a potential candidate. And you got that. And then obviously what starts to happen is, you're playing at your university or professional level, and then Hockey Canada would they have different camps. If you're going to that next stage, they'll maybe invite you to a camp, and then they'll slowly start to, narrow it down and then figure out, who's going to be invited to the Olympic camp. I didn't go any of those, stages, but that's generally kind of the process. If you're, going from the female route, obviously the male route's very, very different. Where you just play in the NHL, and then if you're doing well, they kind of select you to the team. So it's a very different process. You don't go through the training camps and the selection camps and stuff on the male side.
Yeah, and different sports. I don't know a massive amount about it. Don't get me wrong, but different sports do it different ways as well, don't they? They have like certain ones will have trials and competitions, kind of in-house competitions almost in the lead up to it.
No, exactly. Like especially some of those individual sports, right? You look at swimming or gymnastics or fencing or any of those individual sports. They do, right? They have one you have to compete within, I guess, your own country to figure out if you are then potentially going to be sent off. And so yeah, they're usually through world championships or national championships, right? They start to figure out who's going to go. So it's not even a training camp. It's more of you actually are in competition. You have to compete at a very good level and win your races and do well to then be selected to the team.
Yeah, it's a tough gig, right? Going through all that to get to the Olympics, and a lot of people, because I suppose it's even more different than kind of trying out for a pro team, right? Because if you try out for a pro team or whatever, you can probably try out again next year and next year, but this is every 4 years, so you don't get many opportunities.
No, you don't. You don't. And, there's definitely cases of people who've been maybe on the national program for 3 years and then they get cut the year of the Olympic. So then they don't go to the Olympics, right? And you're kind of thinking it. So it is very different. As you said, you can just, retry out for a pro team or, another pro team may want you. If you get cut from one team, you'll get signed by another team. So it's very different where this is 4 years in the making for majority of the athletes where this is it. Like this is, they don't have a professional league. They're training just for this moment and to either make it or not make it, or to, if you make it, then go there and maybe not do as well as you could. It's a lot to gear yourself up for just 4 years, every 4 years for one singular moment.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure as well, that, isn't it? When you've been training for 4 years for something to turn, it's a lot of pressure to perform on the day.
It can be, and that's again goes into the mental game of how do you frame that so that it maybe isn't as much pressure, or that now it's going to make you potentially choke. And I looked at there was a speed skater, I forget where he's from. I think it might be the Netherlands or somewhere over in Europe, and he talked about that. He said, and he ended up winning the last Olympics, so you'd be able to figure out who it is. And he said he had to figure out what made this worthwhile, besides just like the gold medal, because you don't know in that moment on that day. There's so many variables that you can't control that could happen and influence the outcome. So what makes 4 years of training worth it? Like you have to figure that out. That's not based off of a gold medal, because it may not happen. And if it does happen, and you see this a lot with also athletes, is they've geared themselves up. They're thinking they're going to feel a certain way, life is going to be a certain way once they win gold, and then they do win gold, and then it's not, that the outcome doesn't give them what they thought it would give them, and then there's a big letdown, and then there's a whole process afterwards to try and deal with. So you really do have to figure out, like, why are you doing this? What's meaningful within the journey itself? And obviously, yes, you're aiming to be your very best in that moment, but that can't be the full purpose of the 4 years.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And I think if you hang everything on that, that winning the medal or wherever it may be, then it becomes difficult, right? You've got to really enjoy the process, and it's got to be about the process and enjoying the ride and the moments along the way, because that's what you're creating. You're creating like great memories along the way, and enjoyable moments that you can kind of, I don't know, kind of fill up your basket of life to go like, oh yeah, I got this great memory, that great memory. Because winning a medal is fantastic, but it's short lived, right?
It's short-lived, and yeah, very much short-lived. So if you do get it, it's great, but it's extremely short-lived. And so then what's next? And if you made it meaningful beyond just that gold medal, then you're good. Like there's not probably that drastic letdown afterwards. It's icing on the cake, and it's a fantastic thing. And obviously can help people moving forward in a variety of ways. But, in my latest book that I wrote a couple of years ago, I interviewed a couple of people, and a number of them were Olympians, and they were a little bit older. They were in their 50s when I interviewed them. So they had a little bit of time to process, that experience for themselves. And one of them was a fencer, and she got fourth. And that's one of the hardest places as an Olympian to get. You're one position shy of a medal, and she had to do all of that unpacking afterwards, right? Of would having gotten bronze or gold or silver really change herself, her value, her worth, all of those things? Like, does it really add something to you? And you have to really hopefully do that in the front end, so that when that moment maybe does happen, you're not having to unpack it so deeply afterwards. You still probably have to kind of work through it a little bit. But yeah, when you look at the smart athletes and the ones that enjoy it, and probably do end up doing really well, they've done that in the front end, kind of like what I was saying with that speed skater. He changed his training. He gave himself weekends off so he could hang out with friends and have a little bit of a life. And not all athletes would do that, right? They're so focused and immerse themselves 100% in the training process. But he found that worked to be able to actually push himself harder during the week and have a little bit of balance from more of a mental side to really enjoy this journey. And so you have to hopefully figure that out before that moment, because you don't know. Everyone's great at the Olympics. They're there for a reason, and one small thing could throw off 4 years of work, and or somebody else's exceptional performance that one day um, just beats you.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, and it's interesting that you say about having weekends off and taking time on that. And I think it's different for everybody, right? Some people that probably doesn't work for them, and they have to kind of have that kind of type A. I have to do this on this time and day, and this, and this, and this. Whereas other people kind of need that release, that kind of normality, and live life, and kind of step away from it to function. And ultimately, whatever works best for your performance is the right thing to do.
No, absolutely. Everyone's different. So what works for one person is not necessarily going to work for another person. So you have to definitely understand yourself and understand what works, and most importantly, what's going to make it so you can do the journey, have fun while you're on that journey, not burn yourself out, but obviously still get to a very, very high level. You still have to be at an exceptionally high level and make sure that you are in peak performance physically, mentally, when that time comes. So you have to take all of those factors into the equation, and yourself, and what's going to help you. And that's really, really important. And I think sometimes that gets lost. It may be less so in individual sports because people have a little bit more, I think, control over what they do and how they do it. But definitely, that's more difficult in a team sport. And I've definitely found that a little bit difficult at times in a team sport, because generally you all get the same, off ice training plan. You all are supposed to do the same physical warm before a game. Like it's all about unity and team stuff. And I do get that. That's can be important. But and I think it's changed a little bit now. Maybe when you get into the pro level, right, there's a little bit more room for that individuality of how do you get yourself prepared. But I definitely found that hard, where it was like everyone had to kind of do the same thing, and that didn't work for me, because everybody's body is different, everybody's way they need to train is different, or how they need to get themselves prepared is different. So to kind of put everyone in a box, I found a little bit hard at times.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I've seen that. I've been around kind of professional environments with kind of rugby teams and stuff like that, and they do now, well, a lot more. Not everybody, but a lot more. They'll do the group sessions, which obviously you have to do, is very important. But they will also program in some time for individual stuff, so people can go and kind of work on what they want to work on, or what they need to work on, or what's been kind of agreed with them and the coaches what they need to work on. And I think that's an important aspect to fit in, really, so that you can kind of, like you say, do the things that you need to do to kind of develop yourself. Might just be a mental thing that, oh, I need to work on this, and that just helps you. The fact that you think you're working on it might just be enough in itself, without actually doing anything drastic. But I think that's an important aspect of training to get into it, and getting the balance right in a team sport is very difficult, especially with limited time, and all the sports scientists now as well, especially kind of monitoring kind of workload and how much you're actually doing to kind of make sure that you can still perform on a game day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're correct. It's the sports science part and the load management and all these various things they now do, right? They do especially at the professional level, take that more into account than I think they ever have. And you're right, it is very mental at times being able to work on your own stuff because it's part of your preparation. If you feel like you need to, spend a little bit of time doing this one specific thing that maybe you struggled with last game, or you just want to improve, to feel like you got to spend some solid, deep focus time with it, that's going to help you feel more confident heading into the next game.
Absolutely. Something that I didn't ask, and I wanted to ask before we finish at least, is kind of that self talk. So we talked about psychology and mentality and stuff like that, but that kind of self talk, that inner monologue in your head, that well, I hope we all have, either that or I'm crazy. But that talk in your head that can be sometimes quite critical and quite negative, and can kind of affect us in a negative way. How do you kind of deal with that, especially in key moments?
Yes, I'm gonna say something we all can struggle with, that self-talk. And so it's training yourself to, one, be able to maybe reframe the self-talk, and hopefully they'll have very little of it when you are performing, right? When we do look at a flow state or being in the zone, whatever terminology you want to use, there's not really any thought process happening in that moment. So you can function without a lot of thought process and perform at a very high level. The thought process is obviously usually is the thing that gets in your way, because if you're focused and paying attention to your thought process, you're not paying attention 100% to the game itself or to the competition itself. And you have to be able to do that, right? Where your focus is everything. As an athlete, it either is going to make you be able to perform up to your potential or not. And so learning to kind of detach a little bit and observe your thoughts so that you can then direct your attention where it needs to go is really a key skill for athletes. And that's the thing that's really important, is the thought itself is not a problem, and it's going to happen. Like, you look at all athletes, even great athletes, they might have a thought of self-doubt or a negative thought. It's how attached you get to it, how important do you um, I guess see that thought as, or how much do you believe that thought, and then kind of get attached to it and maybe go down a path and create a story and elaborate on that one thought. That's really the difference, is if you can just have that thought and then it's dropped, it's gone, and you're focused back on what you're supposed to be, the thought itself is not the issue.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because I definitely agree with that as well. Because it's the opposite way, right? You can have a positive thought, but if you don't buy into it, you don't believe it, it's worthless, right?
No, exactly right. So it's why, and I'm more of the proponent of neutral self talk versus positive self talk if you're trying to move away from negative, because a lot of athletes that I work with, when they try to do positive self talk, they don't believe it. So then it's nothing. They're just trying to think really positively. It's not really working. They end up getting frustrated, or they're just creating a lot of noise in their own mind because they're trying to like overshadow or talk over the negative self talk with the positive self talk, and now you're just creating a lot of noise. And so as you said, it's a perfect example. Is I have it all the time. People will say a positive thing, I have a positive thought, but they don't believe it. They don't think it's real, and so it does nothing for them.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is true or if it's just anecdotal from me, really, but um, a lot of the negative self-talk that I've experienced, at least in sport and other areas of life, is all tied. It's either tied to past events or future events. What will happen if this goes wrong, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So my focus has always been, and I don't know if this is something you kind of worked on or you help people with as well, is kind of to remove the thoughts of the past, remove the thoughts of the future, and just try and be in the moment, to try and bring myself into that moment, really.
No, you're absolutely correct with that, right? When we look at one of the biggest issues and what impacts performance the most is what we call mental time travel, which is going forward or backwards in time, and that usually does create negative thoughts, or the negative thoughts are making you maintain your focus on the past or into the future. When you're in the present moment, there is really what's there to be negative about in that moment, right? And that goes into kind of what I tell my clients with the neutral self talk is, when you're in the moment, any self-talk can just be directed at what's the thing you have to do in this moment, what can you control, what's the action step you can take based off of this moment, and then there's really no negativity associated with it. So being present and in the moment is really really important, but it is a trainable skill. It's very hard when there's pressure and stress and other variable things that really make it easy for the mind to want to hop to the future or go backwards in time. How do you maintain ability to be present, because that's going to make so many other things a lot easier to do.
Yeah, I've read a book quite a while ago. I don't know if you've read it. It's called Legacy by Mark Kerr.
I do. I have read that book. Yes.
Yeah, it's brilliant, right? But he talks in that about kind of how the All Blacks, the great rugby team, how they kind of bring themselves back to the moment, and they all have their individual kind of triggers. One of them splashes water on their face, and one of them kind of does some other ritual. But every time, that's what they do to kind of bring themselves back into the moment, and it kind of helps to kind of cut off that kind of negative talk or that kind of future and past kind of view, and just focus in on, right, new moment. This is what we're doing.
No, exactly. Like one of those kind of, yeah, present moment anchors, like, splashing your water in the face. And, you do that enough times and you associate it with being present, then it kind of creates that trigger of, splashing water in your face helps to draw you back in. And especially that when it creates a sensory experience, which is very helpful. It's something I tell my clients, not necessarily splashing water in the face, but like, picking up some grass, or if they're a baseball player, picking up a little bit of dirt, running it through your hand. So any of that sensory experience where you're paying attention to, and really drawing yourself into the present moment is very, very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you get out on the ice much anymore, Kate?
I do. I still play weekly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I know. So I still get out there, obviously just for fun now. Sometimes it's kind of in a, what we call it over here, a beer league. Now it's just more of a pickup kind of style game, which is even more fun. It's almost kind of like being a kid again when you just go and play at the local rink and play pickup. And we do keep score a little bit, but there's no refs, and you're just out there having fun and being competitive, and that's a lot of fun. And then if I ever go back to, I sometimes will go back in the winter. I didn't this year, but go back to visit my family in Toronto. My dad still builds a rink, so then I'll get on the ice out there in the winter and kind of play around. And I really enjoy that, because then that really does take me back to, being a kid. I think that was one of my favorite things. I've always loved just being on the ice and honing skills, and um, you know, exploring my own potential. That what I think made me the most just enjoyment and happiest when I was doing that. So that's a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know how you do it, to be honest. I don't have the best hand-eye coordination as it is, but let alone doing it on ice, I think I'd have no chance.
Well, again, if you start learning to skate when you're two, it becomes a little bit easier when you're developing those skill sets at a pretty young age, and you don't care so much about messing up and all those things. You're not as self conscious. I think that helps a lot to learn it, because then by the time you're getting older, it's just all second nature.
Yeah, I mean, I can barely skate. I can do a little bit, but I can not get myself killed, but not good enough to kind of compete in a sport on there, which is a shame, really, because I always liked the Mighty Ducks when I was growing up, so I always wanted always wanted
Yeah,
to do a little bit.
yeah, it is hard. It is hard to coordinate the skating and the stick handling if you're not used to that. But yeah, if you do it young enough, you're good. But that's where I give my hats off to. I've definitely know some adults who've done learn to skate and learn to play hockey and figuring it out, and I give them a lot of credit, because it's not easy to do when you get older.
Yeah, definitely. It's a challenge. It's
Hmm.
not the easiest to get a handle on. I did have rollerblades as well. To kind of, because we don't have many ice rinks in the UK, really, not a massive amount. You just have to travel. So we had rollerblades, me and my friends, rollerblades and hockey sticks, and we would go out and play and pretend we were the Mighty Ducks.
Oh, so you got some of it down. If you can rollerblade and play hockey, you're pretty good then. You're like
Oh no, but I could play hockey is a loose term, really loose. We were trying, but it was, we weren't good.
yeah, that's fun. Yeah, I mean it's not much different than how not here in Southern California. There's not a huge amount of rinks in San Diego. I think there's only 5 down here. So a lot of kids grow up playing roller hockey and do that, because that's obviously a little bit easier. And I did that growing up, on the street in front of the house. You'd throw on the roller blades, play a little bit of hockey. That's what you kind of did in the summer.
Yeah, it's a good laugh, to be fair.
Hmm.
Um, Kate, you mentioned briefly your book earlier. Tell me a little bit about your book.
Yeah, so it's called The Athlete Within, and it's my third book, but it's the most in depth of all my books. Really, it took, obviously, kind of, I guess at the time, 13 years of experience, and really kind of what I had seen from working with athletes at different ages and different levels. Really, what were the core components of mental performance, or just really trying to help break it down into, digestible, manageable pieces, but still the most important pieces. And I kind of structured it in a way that I thought flowed well and really encompassed the work I was doing with clients. And so basically the three parts of the book is, number one is you need to know yourself beyond being an athlete, kind of what we were talking about. That's really important. And then obviously though, knowing yourself as an athlete and what, as we already talked about, what helps you or what works for you and what do you need, obviously more specifically from the mental side, to be able to perform. And then looking at, one of the most important things is you need to understand that you don't get to choose the situations and circumstances you typically find yourself in, but you get to choose your response. And that's an attitude to say that, okay, I can choose how I'm going to respond, and that is 100% in your control. But you don't always get to choose, if you make a team or don't make a team, or what role you're playing on that team, all these various things. And so you have to be able to know that you always get to choose that response. And then how do you want to choose that response? And what are the things that are going to help you to choose a response that aligns with you being able to still be at your best? And then finally, looking at presence. So really encompassing things like being able to train your attention, manage your energy, and really understand what kind of inner energy you do need to really facilitate a flow state and to really help you, really dive deep into being able to be more connected to the performance that you're having. And so that's kind of the journey through the book, and giving people some tools and some practical things that they can work with, and just really overall giving them the mental framework that they're going to need to then be able to build off of, right, to create that foundation and that initial framework. And then obviously with time you build it, and you build on top of it and make it stronger and stronger.
Yeah, I think that's important because I think we've talked a lot about kind of the principles and theory behind stuff, but ultimately having the tools and knowing how to kind of develop those is really important as well, right?
That's extremely important, right? You can't just do the what, which obviously is the what, but also the how. How do you do this? How do you apply it? How do you implement it? And then obviously not every single thing in that book is going to fit for every person, right? Part of it is the how comes into knowing yourself and what you think you need to really be at your best, but it gives a good overview of the different options. And obviously then for some people, they can explore from those options. I give them maybe some different things that align with that. The how is absolutely important. How to implement things, that's a big thing that I do with clients, is how do you take this and how do you implement it? How do you implement in a moment when that pressure is on? That's really key.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can people find this book, Kate?
Best place, especially in various countries, would be Amazon. So it's up on Amazon. So whether you're in the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, you can find it on Amazon.
Cool. And where can people kind of connect with you if they wanted to connect with you?
Yeah, two best places would be my website, which is qpathlete.com. And then I have Instagram. Instagram and YouTube are probably the things I'm most active on social media wise. So Instagram is the handle qpathlete. And then my YouTube channel is Quantum Performance.
No worries. I'll give you a follow on there anyway, but and I'll try and drop the links in for people to make it easier for them to find you and stuff. Before we do kind of bring this episode to a close, do you have any kind of final thoughts or messages that you'd like to share with people?
Oh, that's always a good question. The one I always like to give people, I think, is just really focus on the quality of the experience. Obviously, we were talked a lot about process versus outcome, and I think when we look at people who really enjoy the process and are the happiest or have the most joy during the journey, as they focus really highly on the quality of the experience, and that drives them into the moment. Where they're not so focused on and worrying about what's going to happen afterwards. They're really, really focused on, let's make this moment, this experience, one of really, really high quality. Because when you're there, you're present, everything will flow more easily. You're not overthinking things. You're able to just kind of let, from an athlete standpoint, all of your physical skill sets kind of flow out and flow through you and come to the surface. And that makes it a much more enjoyable journey.
Absolutely. And I think if you can do that and you can be in the moment, not just in sport, in life, I think you'll have a better time and more enjoyment, but also more success because you'll have more attention on what you're actually doing in that moment as well.
No, exactly. It isn't just for sports. The individual who kind of was the, I guess, grandfather of flow state. His whole purpose was just, seeing what made people the happiest. It wasn't athletes specifically, and that's where he found, that these people really focused on the quality of the experience, and they really made a purpose to make their life designed with that in mind. And he found that those people were not only the happiest, but then they described the kind of the states they got into as flowy, and that's where the flow state came from. So it really was not just for athletes; it was for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, it's been a fantastic having you on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, no, I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem at all. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Oh, there you go. Should